Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we are with the second of today's decks from Lexa. And this is the sixth Doctor, Sagas. They say, you mentioned that you were annoyed that Yenna didn't have blue for a Saga cloning deck. And then they released the perfect commander for Saga cloning. So here's the deck that you said you were interested in. Perfect, exactly. I love that this has been made seemingly for me and the exact Saga things that I want, but also generally happy to see more timey-wimey stuff, is my understanding. I've watched very little of Doctor Who. My fiance has shown me, I think, 3 episodes of the early 2000s one, and it's very early 2000s, but it does seem like a good romp for those who like it. So, thank you so much once again for supporting the channel, Lexa, and let's get into the 6th Doctor Sagas and understand why this commander is the commander we've chosen. The 6th Doctor, I'm going to slur that 6th a lot, is a 6-mana Simic card that's green and blue, 3/3 Time Lord Doctor. They have one ability, the Time Lord's Prerogative, that says whenever you cast a historic spell, copy, except the copy isn't legendary. This ability triggers only once each turn. Historic permanents are, or historic spells, are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. So obviously here we're really excited to use the saga ability, but to be honest, the 6th Doctor can be used in an artifact deck, a legendary deck, or any combination of the 3. Then of course, since we're using the Doctor, we get a companion, which the one here is Perry Brown, though I might suggest another one. Perry Brown is a 4-mana 2/3 human. She says the first historic spell you cast each turn has Convoke, and that's it. And so Perry Brown is here to help us cast our historic spells, the first one each turn, and then after which we can use her not only to cast our regular commander, but to cast sagas after the fact. And here we have the deck itself. And oh boy, are there a lot of exclamation points on a lot of cards that when I open this up, this is the first time I've ever seen these cards. So it was a little tricky for me to know what all of these cards do, but I think there's some real good stuff here. But it does kind of feel also as a first draft. Much like the earlier deck we saw today, I feel like the support cards, I'm looking through sorceries and instants, most of the artifacts, are really strong. And then we have the core, let's say, of the tribal deck, which here is Sagas, that is good, but probably could use some shifting. The important thing to note here is that just like our previous tribal deck with Reach, this deck shows that it is the substance of our tribe that will win us the game. We can ramp into really good positions, but if we don't have anything good to play out of it, or we don't have anything that finishes the game, we might be in a bit of a pickle, let's say. And before we go any further, I think I'd say that is the main thing I take away from this deck, is that unfortunately it does feel like we don't really have a win condition. And I'm not going to interfere with that too much. I'm not coming here to introduce like a whole new win condition to kind of set the deck up that way. It's more so that I'm interested in supporting this deck. And then when we look at where the deck, we kind of choose a power level of the deck, we can be a little pickier on the sagas around. But let's start from the top by looking at the curve. The curve is really nice. We have a lot of 2 and 3 mana cards, which I don't mind. We have quite a few land ramp or land, one of his land seeking with Sylvan Scrying, and Board the Weatherlight is not ramp, but it is selection. And then we have a bunch of ramp here at 2. So we have quite a bit of ramp, and then we have some sagas at 2. And then at 3, we have the majority of the cards, which I think that makes a lot of sense because it's just normal for a lot of these cards, a lot of the playable sagas start at 3, after which we get to 4 and 5, and we're trickling out. And 6, the only card we have here is the 6th Doctor, something I really like. And at 7, we have Kiora, Best the Sea God, which is arguably, I would say, our win condition. If we can play this multiple times, get multiple copies, get multiple 8/8s, we are probably going to get ahead very quickly. I would also define this, and I wonder if this is something I should do when I am looking at a deck, because I think it would be helpful. I would define this as an engine deck. I think there should be like, I'll have to think of all the categories. I don't want to make like, there are 4 categories of decks, because I think that's often silly. But in my mind, we've got like aggro, we've got combo, we've got engines, and we've got, I guess, control or prison. There's probably a few more that I haven't thought of. But this is an engine deck. What do I mean by that? Well, what it aims to do is to put together cards that will gain you gradual advantage over time. No combination will immediately win the game, but certain combinations here and there will put us closer and closer to that victory. I believe recently we saw a engine deck that was, let me see, what are the last few decks I worked on? Which would have been Go Shintai. Yeah, Go Shintai is definitely an engine deck. Also Elmar Wernog, that was an engine deck. Decks that aim to kind of make some, what seem to be like often a lot of triggers, and what just seems to be innocuous effects kind of compound on each other and propel you further and further ahead. So what do I think we can kind of fix up here? Well, let's get the first idea out of the way, and it's Perry Brown. So Perry Brown is really interesting, but I don't know if she fundamentally is the best companion. Why do I say that? Well, I think Perry Brown functions as kind of a great 99 card, because the idea of using her to convoke and other creatures to convoke into our enchantments is rather good, but we don't have the means to guarantee it. Namely, we have only 12 creatures in the deck, and though we have quite a few token generations in our enchantments, I don't know if we have enough that I want to rely on them. And though some creatures are really, really, like Birth of Meletis is really, really good. My computer is taking a bit of a break here. There we go. Is really, really good at creating, you know, a wall that's fantastic for Convoke. Or we have, where we are, Welcome to Sweet Tooth, and I think we have another one that creates 1/1s here, Battle for Brenegard. Like, these are good, but I don't know how reliable they are. They are pretty weak creatures, and the big creatures we don't want to use as Convoke. So I think the bottom of the bar is that Perry is a 4-mana mana dork that I was going to say only works for the first spell, but mana dorks don't work multiple times, so that's fine. And I just don't know if a 4-mana mana dork is where I want to be. Whereas I think down here, Barbara Wright, on the other hand, which gives all of our sagas read ahead, I like this a lot more. I think having this as a guaranteed turn 2 play, though we do have a lot of turn 2 plays, or a guaranteed play you can do before you cast another card will be rather good. But that being said, read ahead tends to work a lot better on the higher mana cards. So maybe I'm having second thoughts. Let's see. Sarah Jane Smith gives us historic triggers. Ian Chesterton gives Saga Replicates. Maybe I like that a little more. And Romana II has, yeah. So I don't like Romana here because I believe she's just too much mana. Kind of the same way I feel about Perry. Ian Chesterton kind of sticks out to me. I think the strongest one is for sure Barbara, but you have to kind of reevaluate every saga you've put into the deck in order to decide whether or not that's good. And after that, as a nice little medium, like the most generic one is Sarah Jane Smith, because getting a clue token on every historic spell is not bad, considering that that means triggering off of your talismans, for example, gives you both mana and card draw, which is really, really good. Or Ian Chesterton, if you want to go a little harder into mana ramp, so that you can be like ramping to 6 early and then casting one of your 3 mana spells. That doesn't make sense because you cast your commander. So let's say you ramp to 4, then you have to cast Ian. Yeah, I don't know if the numbers really make sense, but being able to replicate, having another clone ability in your command zone, I think is rather good. And I think Ian Chesterton is really, really good because he represents really early, you know, double uses of your what do you call it, of your sagas, whereas the 6th Doctor then represents later uses that require less mana, just more mana to put in. So that's kind of my opinion. I'll leave it to you. I don't think it's going to make a massive difference, but I think, yeah, so I think probably Ian or Sarah Jane Smith. Though Sarah Jane Smith might be on a more general historic kick, but I do think having card draw in your command zone is always, always good. So probably Sarah or Ian. Okay, moving on. There's a lot of these Doctor Who cards. And I'm gonna be honest, they're kind of befuddling for me. Some of them, like for example, City of Death, I have a really, really hard time sussing out how strong it is, because this card could be really, really good, or it could just be okay. Because if you aren't able to have 6th Doctor out and, like, for example, have 2 copies of Sarah Jane Smith from his ability, well, sorry, pause. That's something I should point out. Something really interesting is that the 6th Doctor will copy your companions, and Perry Brown is the only companion that you have. Actually, both Perry Brown and Ian Chesterton, interestingly enough, they're if you replicate them, if you have a token copy of your companion, the token doesn't do anything. It's each the 2 replicate triggers on a card doesn't change anything, and you can't double convoke a card. It's still the same thing, so also doesn't matter. Which makes Sarah Jane Smith honestly my pick. I think she's the best because 2 clues every time you cast a historic spell is really, really good. Okay. On your first historic spell, I should say. But still, very, very strong. And also, she has something in common with the 6th Doctor that I'll bring up later that I think is rather important. Okay, so, sorry, going back. So looking at City of Death. City of Death feels like a clunky card. Because, one, this is a Saga deck, so the fact that you can't clone a Saga is kind of rough. The second thing is that if you don't have if you haven't cloned one of your legendary creatures or one of your artifacts, the only thing you can really copy reliably is the treasure token. And I think if you're copying the treasure token, it's not ideal. Granted, you have 6 turns, or I should say, not including when you cast this, so 5 additional turns to get something else out. But even then, it feels a little strange. I feel like this card is going to be really, really tough to kind of vibe out, but I do recommend playing it and figuring it out. A lot of these other ones do kind of middle ground things. Obviously, we've picked the ones that make the most tokens, which I think is the right thing to be doing here. I think that's the floor on that is rather good. The Caves of Azon Androzani. I feel this is a little clunky. I guess for each non-saga, I think this one's a little clunky. I know you seem to like stun, especially with right below it, Time of Ice, but I prefer Time of Ice a lot more than the other one. Tutoring a Doctor, you only have 1 Doctor in your deck, so you might have already drawn it, whereas the fact that it doesn't work with your sagas, I don't really, really like. And stunning down creatures isn't that impressive, I think. And the fact that you have to stun, you don't get even to tap the stunned creatures, means certain targets are just not viable. Anything with vigilance will just get around it, which isn't ideal. Also, Bounty of the Luxa. You can't copy it, right? Like if I had 2 copies of this card, I'd say, well, at least it's something. But by itself, it's just kind of a clunky card. If we had more permanent copies, maybe. But even then, we don't have control, so we might have it on the wrong flood counter at certain turns, which can be clunky. And also, it's 4 mana in a deck that like doesn't need to ramp that hard. We need to hit 6, don't get me wrong. And the fact that it won't ramp you the turn after you play it, the turn after you play it, you draw a card, and then you ramp the turn after that. I don't like it. I think it's kind of rough. All right. Also, Parallel Lives feels close to win more in this deck because no, this is not true. You do have a lot of token generation. Okay, that's fine. All right. Let's see anything else. Banish to another universe. I don't like this. And the reason I don't like this is that I would say even an enchantment deck, but especially in an enchantment deck, having a 1 mana Oblivion Ring ability is just, I don't know if it's good enough because it's vulnerable to all the same hate that your other cards are vulnerable to. So anything that destroys all enchantments, you're vulnerable to it. But also, it's not late line binding. It doesn't have flash. It's a very slow card. I don't know. I personally don't very much like this card, but I do understand its power. It is also another time Doctor Who card. And I will say, I don't know to what degree the Doctor Who cards are kind of the point of the deck. So you may just have to ignore some of my opinions on certain cards, like the TARDIS. This isn't good enough. This is very, very clunky. I think the fact that you have to attack with it is really, really rough. Is it easy to get that trigger? Yeah, I guess so. But at the same time, it's like you have to have this out. You have to attack with it. You have to hope it doesn't die in combat so you can keep it for another turn. And then you have to have a card that you can cascade into, which means you need 4 or higher because most of your spells are at 3. You have a few 1 mana spells, so it's not bad, but around then, I think a lot of our 1 mana spells are reactive. Half our 1 mana spells are reactive, so we have to be really careful when we cascade with a 2 mana spell. And a 3 mana spell only has 2 options, so we have to kind of try to cascade with a 4 mana spell. I don't know. I think this is a clunky card personally, and the Planeswalking is fun if you are playing Planes Chase, but if you are not, I don't know if it's good enough. All right, I think that's generally my points of things to cut. I think like if you really wanted to be picky, there's a lot of the extra doctor stuff we can get rid of it. K9 feels not ideal. It is fun to have copies of the K9 because then they have Ward 2 technically, but yeah, you don't need to make things unblocked. It's a cute dog. I won't take that away from you. If you're playing, once again, if you're playing for Doctor Who stuff, then this is ideal. Mondrak, I've already talked about that. Okay. All right, let's leave it like that and let's look for additions because I do have quite a few and a lot of them are more ideas. And I think part of it is that maybe there is a point to be made of figuring out exactly which cards are worth, sagas are worth keeping in the meantime, as that they're not all made the same. Michigo's Reign of Truth, for example, a lot of the transformative cards aren't ideal. Like Michigo, Portrait of Michigo is probably one of our only win conditions. She doesn't even fly, my goodness. And so like, I don't want to take her out, but on the other hand, she does very, very little outside of pumping a few creatures, of which you do not have many. And since you're attacking with many tokens, possibly, they'll just block the big one and let the tokens through. So some of the cards that I'm going to suggest, they're almost all of them support. I do have a few sagas that I thought were interestingly missed. I think 3 sagas here, and then a bunch of support that I think is worth running to kind of add to what we're doing here. And the first one, you've already done one of the things that I wanted here, where we have Raf Capuchin with the idea of Flash. Flash is really, really important in this deck because the 6th Doctor, and notably Sarah Jane, is that her name? Sarah Jane Smith, both of them, my God, that name, both of them only trigger once a turn. So how do we get around this? Well, we start running cards that allow us to cast our Sagas on other turns so that we can get multiple of these triggers over the turn cycle. I think we should be playing a few more. I think I have 3 or 4 here to advise you to think about. I don't know to what degree you'd want to play all of them, but I think they're definitely worth playing. They are already good cards generally because the ability to go at instant speed is very, very good, especially with Sagas, because if you cast them at your opponent's last opponent's end step, you might as well get both triggers in a row, which is rather strong. So I think they're worth putting in. So the easiest one is Leyline of Anticipation. Also, obviously, I said before, but you do have Wrath. But Leyline of Anticipation, that's the easiest one, because if it's in your opening hand, you get it for free. After that, we've got Vedalken Orrery, which is a long, a very notorious card at this point, I think. I don't usually like it, but I think here it's rather good. It's just kind of a worse Leyline of Anticipation, but it is... I mean, it is historic, so you could have 2 copies of it. Hint, that won't do anything, but it is worth considering. After that, I think a spicy one is Tidal Barracuda. Tidal Barracuda is interesting. It is a creature, which makes it vulnerable to removal, but it does create this interesting dynamic where everyone gets flash, and then no one can cast on your turn, except for you. And I think that's really, really good. It's kind of a mix of two. It's a mix of 2 cards that are good. Like, it is a mix of Leyline of Anticipation with mana reduction, if you want to imagine it, to 2 by giving it to everyone. And then it's a mix of that white card, whose name I can't remember, that prevents that's basically a silence on your turn where your opponents can't do anything. I like cards that are mixes of 2 cards without, dramatically altering the mana. And Tidal Barracuda, I think, does really, really well here. I don't know, if people who haven't had a chance to play with silence effects don't know what it's like to untap with the knowledge that no one can do... Well, let's not say do anything. This says can't cast spells specifically. They can still activate abilities. But nobody can cast spells on your turn is a really big freedom that I think people often underestimate how much of an advantage that gives you. So I think it's rather good. And another one that's kind of interesting is Helioid the Radiant Dawn. I like this a lot, because one, you get this is historic, and it has a very good ETB, where you are returning Sagas into your hand. I really like this for obviously because Sagas by themselves go to the graveyard. So having this card to bring back a Saga for 4 mana is already very, very good. The fact that it is legendary means that it'll trigger off of your commander, so you get 2 triggers, which is really, really good. But then that's not even counting the transform side, where all of a sudden all of our spells have flash and they get at least 1 mana cheaper on our opponent's turns. More so if they draw any cards. I think this is an excellent, excellent addition to the deck. Definitely the one I think is the strongest addition by far. I also think, for what it's worth, I'm going to actually transform this back because the front is really good too. I actually think as well, Alchemists Refuge is probably the least intrusive one you can add in here because it's just a land. And to be fair, I didn't see if you were playing it. Okay, you aren't playing it. It's the least intrusive one because all of a sudden it just adds, it just adds 3 mana technically if you count this, but a additional 3 mana cost to any of your spells, and bam, they have flash. And especially with our cheaper Sagas, basically putting 5 mana aside for a 2 mana Saga, so that we can trigger our Doctor again, just to get 2 copies of Birth of Meletis or Welcome to Sweet Tooth, I think is rather, rather good. And then when we hit 6, we can start getting into the meat of things. But because it's a land, it doesn't feel like a wasted card if we aren't able to do that. So I think this is a very, very easy inclusion for sure. Now, this is a higher mana card, but I think it's worth considering, and that's Brilliant Restoration. Just 7 mana, return all enchantment cards and artifacts technically, but mainly return all your Sagas from your graveyard to the battlefield. And this is a rather good finisher, I would say. I think there's going to be kind of the climax of a lot of saga decks, engine decks, is to have one profoundly impactful turn. And that will set you up that no matter what happens going forward, you are in a position to win. And Brilliant Restoration is very, very good at that, because all of a sudden you get 4 or 5, maybe more sagas in play all at once. And that's just so much for your opponents to deal with. That's so many triggers. I mean, it's so much for you to deal with too, because of the number of triggers you'll get. But at the same time, the sheer amount of tokens, the sheer amount of payoffs you're going to be building towards will put you in a winning situation for sure. But it is 7 mana, so it's not the easiest thing to suggest. Then a few quick support cards. Satsuki, obviously very, very good. Every time you tap her, you get a counter on each of your creatures, and then when she dies, you get one of your sagas. I said creatures, sorry, on your sagas. And then when she dies, she comes back. She gives you basically a saga off the battlefield or off the graveyard into your hand. She is historic, so you would get a copy of her, which makes her even stronger, because all of a sudden you can, for a lot of sagas, if you have 2 Satsukis off of Summoning Sickness, right, you can immediately finish the final chapter in one go, which is rather powerful, because a lot of these sagas are built around that it's going to take multiple turns for them to go off. Likewise, let's see here, Sithis, Harvest's Hand, is a very, very good card in any enchantment deck, but considerably better when you can have 2 copies of her. So I do like that as well. Something that's not historic, but Eidolon of Blossoms triggers on ETBs. So your commander making a copy of your saga will draw you an additional card. If you reanimate your sagas, that'll draw an additional card. I'm rather happy. Also, I just love the art of this card. Very, very good. So I do very much so like that here. And Jukai Naturalist popped out at me. I don't know to what degree I really like it, but it's something worth considering. All right. Two more general support spells, and then I have 3 sagas for you. Rite of Harmony really caught my eye because on certain turns, this can be really powerful. Namely, what I would do, right, is depending on which sagas you have, you can Rite of Harmony, go to your main phase, and then one of your sagas creates creatures. You draw a card. Then you cast a saga that you'll get a historic copy of, which both of those will draw you a card each. And then if those also give you tokens that are creatures, well, look at that, you're drawing even more cards. I really, really do like this. I think there's a lot of times this card is going to draw you very, very many cards. And even if you don't have your commander, being able to play Rite of Harmony into like Battle for Bredegard is 5 mana to draw 2 cards, right? And I think that's fine in certain situations where that's like kind of the floor, right? Is that you have no other sagas that are going to trigger and no other sagas in hand that you can play after. I think you can probably guarantee to draw 2 off of that card, which if you think about it in the sense of 2 mana, 2 cards, that's a really, really good deal. And obviously the ceiling is really, really high. And the flashback, I would suggest, is just really good gravy on top on this card. And then something I just think is missing is Ewit. You can just play Ewit. Ewit's just one of the most powerful green cards for a reason. It'll just buy back any of your sagas, nice and easy. Obviously, Heliod is much, much better here, but I don't think you'd be too sad grabbing, a fetch land or grabbing, I don't know, removal again. Like, she's just really, really good, so definitely worth playing. Okay, so 3 mana sagas I want to suggest in each of your colors, and they're going to have one thing rather in common, and it is card draw. So let's get started. The first Ironian Games is a card I rather like. It's a fragile card, but I do like everything it does. You get a free creature, then you can pump up that creature or another creature, then you can draw 2 cards, and assuming you had no other creatures, you could have pumped your 1/1 into a 4/4, being able to then draw your 2 cards. Excuse me. And then you get your gold token, which is a treasure token that doesn't need to tap. The superior treasure token. So I find overall this card is just really, really good. Obviously gets considerably better with 2 copies of it because you can have 2 different creatures at 4 power so that you have more safety on the 3rd chapter. Or you can dump all those +1/+1 counters onto 1 creature and be really, really happy. So I think pretty good card, pretty standard, a really nice 4-chapter saga where all of the chapters are rather good, with probably the second one being the weakest, but the rest are pretty good. Then we have 2 Lord of the Rings, one from the main set, which is Scroll of Isildur. I want to make sure you didn't have either of these. I'm very, very sure you haven't, but yeah, okay, just wanted to make sure. Scroll of Isildur, first of all, will steal an artifact. As long as you have it, you get a free tempt, which doesn't matter as much. You get to tap 2 creatures down and stun them. Hey, I know you love that. And then you say, draw a card for each tapped creature target opponent controls. Now this works well with our other freezing one. Where is it? Time of Ice, among other things. But the thing I really, really like about this is how it works really well in doubles when there's 2 of this card. You get to steal 2 artifacts, which pays for the majority of the spell usually, because you're probably grabbing mana rocks. You get 2 tempts, which does that get you anywhere? It does get you. 2 tempts is to give something loot, which I think is the best one to get to if you're going to get to anyone and stop. Getting to 2 is worth it the most, so that's rather good. You tap up to 4 creatures and stun them, which can completely tap a player out of the game. And then, if they had the 4 creatures on the 3rd chapter, you draw 4 cards twice. I think this is really, really good. I think this is a very easy inclusion. It doesn't make tokens. That's kind of rough, but I think it's still worth considering. All right, so the last one is Of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit. And I like this once again. If you caught on, it's the draw that I really like. All of these cards, the 2 ones, selectively, but this one at least guaranteed, will replace itself during its count, during its chapters. So the first one, you get a +1/+1, a food token. The second one, you draw a card, get a food token. And the third one, you get a 1/1 halfling for each food token you control. That's quite a few creatures, and that's at least 2 creatures, if not more, with other food token generation. And food tokens are generally good anyways. So I think this is a really, really good deal. But once again, the key of it is the second card. Something that makes engines work really well is that the floor of engine cards are low, but their possibilities are really, really high. And so here we are with a card where the floor is draw a card. That's the floor. I'm ignoring the food tokens. I'm ignoring if you have any of the creatures or halflings. The floor is in 2 turns, you draw a card. And that's fine, I think. Everything else gets to be gravy. If you have your commander out, you get to draw 2 cards, making this a slow divination. And I think that's rather good. I think this is a very decent card to put in here that I think, will draw you into or help your deck feel slim when we are trying to make our way through all of these different sagas. And I think that's generally going to be my advice for the deck. It definitely seems to be in a bit of an early part of development, but I do like it. We will have to talk about a win condition here because though you will eventually win by drawing enough cards and playing enough sagas, I think it would probably help to have something probably a little better than Koira beats the best the Sea God, though don't get me wrong, this is a very, very strong card, especially if you can, cast it, get 2 copies, bring it back with Ewit or Heliod, cast it again, reanimate it with Brilliant Restoration. You're going to be really, really happy with this card. So I think it is a good enough of a win condition, but as the singular one, it is kind of tough. You do have to tutor into it, and you got to make sure it doesn't get countered every time you try to cast it. Mind you, with your commander out, when you cast it, you'll at least get a copy, which is rather good. But to sum things up, I think I'm still going to suggest we change to Sarah Jane Smith. I think she is probably the best companion out of the bunch, especially if we start using flash shenanigans. I would add some more flash shenanigans for sure. I would definitely add Helioid. If you add one card, if you add one card from this video this year, let it be Helioid, the Radiant Dawn. I do think, oh my god, it's 29 cents too. Oh, so good. He is so good in this deck, and I think like will really perform very, very well. So I think this is definitely the direction to put that card in. I would definitely put maybe Satsuki and Sithis. I think I would definitely consider Rite of Harmony and the Saga. I'm basically going to say all of them because I think these are good suggestions, but I think this deck has a lot of room to find out what it wants to be. And much like the previous deck we talked about, I'm going to end this conversation with a bit of an idea of think about the power level of what this deck can be. And I'm going to say something different. It's really easy for me to just say, well, we'll just take out some of the weaker sagas and put in just generally good cards. Like, it's easy to say that, but something that's worth remembering is that we can really get a little further by leaning onto artifacts, which is something we're missing, and a little more into legendaries to give us a little more variety. It's funny because you sent me this deck with the idea that this is a saga deck I would really enjoy, and I do really enjoy it, but I feel the potential of it is so much more than a saga deck. Now, am I just saying that so I can jam Esper Sentinel in here and get 2 Esper Sentinels? Maybe. But I still think there's a lot of fun, silly things that we can add in, and like Helioid, I think, is a very, very good example of that. And I still want to make a Saga deck out of this. Like, I think Saga is the correct play because there's been so much, as I've mentioned in a few videos recently, we've gotten so much support for enchantments that like building a Saga deck right now is really, really easy to do. So with that in mind, I think it should be a Saga deck, but we can probably lean into a few of the other historic synergies to get a little further ahead. All right, I hope this video was very helpful to you. Thank you so much, Lexa, for supporting the channel again. And if you would like to send me another draft of this deck, which I'd love to see, there is a link in the video description down below where you can send this deck or any deck you'd like to me, and once I get to it, I can make a video of it. But if you want your deck list to be the next video I work on, you can support the channel like Lexa did and bring your deck to the front of the queue. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, do that whole YouTube thing, I'd be very grateful. I really like the Sixth Doctor. I like that he's blonde. That's very funny to me. Also, the question marks that he has. I wonder if that's a thing. Oh, because he's who? That's funny. Also, I think that's a teddy bear on him. I like this guy a lot. And I think his ability is rather strong. He is a bit high mana for my taste. 6 mana is a lot for a commander for me. I really like low mana commanders, but that being said, this is a very, very dramatic ability, right? Since it's not your first historic spell, which I do really like how that's worded, because I guess this is the last thing. I've been really mean to Perry Brown, but something that's worth considering is that if you have a bajillion mana and you have Perry Brown out and you cast the Doctor, that's your first historic spell. So you have to convoke the Doctor, and you can't get another, like you can't get the next convoke trigger that turn for the Saga. I don't think that makes a difference now that I say it out loud, but I just want to be mean to this lady a bit more. But yeah, I really like what he's doing. I think the fact that it can happen right away after you cast him is really strong. I'm really excited to see more decks with Time Lords on them because I think there'll be a really cool variety of deck. All right, good luck with the deck.